Imagine scrolling through your phone one morning and spotting wedding photos. The bride looks familiar. The groom does too. Then it hits you. The bride is your daughter, and this is the first you're hearing of her marriage. No call, no message, no invitation, no warning. That's what happened to Paul Henderson, a father in his mid-50s who believed he had a close bond with his only child, Emily. What followed wasn't a shouting match or a confrontation at an altar. It was quieter, slower, and far more complicated. Because before anyone outside the family even realized something was wrong, Paul made a decision that would send ripples through both of their lives. He sold the house he had given her. Paul Henderson lived in Cedar Falls, a mid-sized town known for quiet streets and long memories. He had worked in architecture for more than 25 years. His wife Laura died when their daughter was 18. Emily was about to leave for university, and the grief in the house was heavy. Paul tried to make sure she never felt abandoned. He checked in often, covered her school costs, and stayed involved without being overbearing. They weren't overly emotional with each other, but they stayed connected. They called on Sundays. They exchanged birthday messages. He visited twice a year while she was in school. After graduation, Emily took a marketing job in a nearby city. She rented an apartment with a friend. She handled her life efficiently and didn't ask for much help. Paul supported her when she needed advice about taxes, budgeting, or insurance. He still saw her as someone finding her footing. When Emily was in her late 20s, Paul decided to help her take a bigger step. He purchased a small 2-bedroom house in her name. He covered the down payment and the closing costs. He didn't move in, didn't keep a key, and didn't dictate how she used it. She agreed to cover the mortgage and utilities. It felt like a practical gift for her future. There were no conditions. There was no conversation about expectations. Over the next 2 years, communication faded. Their weekly conversations became monthly check-ins. When Paul texted, she replied politely but briefly. He assumed she was busy building her own life. He didn't push. What he didn't know was that Emily had been in a relationship for almost 3 years with a man named Daniel Scott. Daniel worked in software design. They met through a coworker. Their relationship grew quietly, and she kept it separate from family discussions. She didn't lie about it. She just didn't talk about it. By the time the wedding happened, some relatives knew Daniel. A few friends knew, but Paul did not. Extended family members assumed he had chosen to stay out of the spotlight or that the event was small by preference. They didn't realize he knew nothing. One Saturday morning, Paul sat with a cup of coffee and scrolled through social media. A family friend had posted photos from a wedding. The bride stood under a simple floral arch, smiling with her head turned slightly. Her hair was styled differently, and the lighting softened her face. But the shape of her eyes and the way she stood were familiar. It was Emily. He clicked more photos. She was standing beside a man he didn't recognize. Guests clapped in the background. A caption congratulated the couple by their first names. There had been no engagement announcement. No message. No mention of a ceremony. Paul stared at the images for nearly an hour. He didn't call anyone. He didn't comment or react. He looked at the date, the location, and the guests. Some were people he had known for years. Distant cousins. A neighbor from long ago, Laura's sister. No one had reached out to him. He didn't message his daughter that day. Instead, he went for a long walk. He tried to make sense of the silence. He wasn't angry about the wedding itself. He was stunned by the secrecy. 2 days later, he called Emily. She answered on the second ring. The conversation was short. She confirmed she had gotten married the previous weekend. When he asked why he hadn't been invited, she said it didn't feel right to make the event complicated. That was the word she used. She didn't apologize. She said it was small and stress-free and had come together quickly. Paul asked if she or Daniel had thought of telling him ahead of time. She said she wasn't ready for opinions, questions, or advice. She said she wanted the day to stay simple. The call ended without raised voices, but the distance was obvious. After the call, Paul thought about the house. He had purchased it in her name, but the mortgage was tied to a joint agreement. He was still a co-signer. The property taxes were partially registered under his account. He went through the paperwork and realized he had legal control over what happened to the property. Within a week, he contacted a real estate firm. He didn't notify Emily. He requested an evaluation and started the process to sell. The bank was informed. The real estate agent moved quickly. When an offer came in, Paul accepted it. Closing took place with no disruptions. Emily found out when she received a letter from the title company asking for a forwarding address. She called immediately. Her voice was calm, but the tension was clear. She asked if it was a mistake. Paul told her it wasn't. She asked why he would do that. He said the house had always been a gift built on trust and inclusion. She had chosen to live a separate life and kept major decisions hidden. He said that if she didn't see him as part of her life, he didn't need to tie his assets to hers. She accused him of retaliation. He said it was clarity. She mentioned that Daniel's family had contributed to the wedding. Paul said families who contribute are usually included. She didn't respond. She hung up. Relatives started hearing pieces of the story. Some said Paul had gone too far. Others said Emily had shut him out unfairly. Neighbors assumed there had been some major fight, but most people didn't know he still had his name on the mortgage. They didn't know how long the relationship had been hidden. They didn't know he had found out by accident. Emily moved into a rental duplex with Daniel. She continued working. She did not take legal action. She told friends she needed space. Paul stayed in his home. He made no further attempts to call or visit. The money from the house sale went into a separate account. He didn't spend it. Months passed. No one reached out directly. About 6 months later, Emily sent a letter. Not a text. Not an email. She didn't apologize, but she acknowledged that the situation had been painful. She said she needed distance and didn't want stress around her marriage. Paul wrote back with a short reply. He said he respected her independence, but secrecy changed things. He said he didn't intend to undermine her choices. He wrote that if she wanted to rebuild trust one day, he would meet her halfway. They didn't return to regular communication, but they didn't cut ties completely. Holiday messages appeared. Brief updates were exchanged. They stayed polite but distant. The story shows how silence can fracture relationships more than arguments can. Emily tried to avoid conflict by keeping the wedding small and private. Paul assumed their quiet communication meant everything was steady. Neither confronted how far apart they had grown. The house became a symbol. Paul saw it as a shared step based on connection. Emily saw it as a path to independence. They never discussed what it meant beyond the paperwork. Unspoken expectations sat between them until an unrelated event triggered the consequences. Losing Laura changed how both of them handled closeness. Paul focused on providing stability and support through actions, not emotion. Emily learned to manage her life without sharing personal details. Those patterns stayed in place for years. Without intentional conversations, distance turned into separation. Nothing about their conflict was loud. There were no public arguments or threats. But the impact was real. A marriage began without a father present. A home changed ownership quietly. Feelings were expressed through decisions instead of words. This kind of situation happens more often than people admit. Adult children protect their choices by withholding information. Parents interpret that silence as exclusion. Both sides believe they're acting reasonably. The real damage happens in the space between their assumptions. Paul didn't act to punish. He acted to reset boundaries. Emily didn't marry to hurt him. She married to stay in control of her own life. Both made choices shaped by habit, not hostility. Their relationship didn't end, but it changed shape. Letters replaced conversations. Respect replaced closeness. The path forward is uncertain but not closed. This is not a story about rage or revenge. It's a story about distance, silence, and the cost of leaving things unsaid. Families don't always break in loud moments. Sometimes they drift apart quietly until the silence itself becomes the message. And sometimes, like in this case, the first sign anything is wrong is a photograph on a screen.